Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing, the live show number 431. It's hard to believe we're actually getting middle of November of 2023. How fast things seem to happen towards the end of the year. Actually, this entire year, in all aspects, goes faster. And I guess apparently, as you get older, time actually seems to do travel faster. It's time to go out to the ISS and slow things down, right? Anyways, thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching us on Facebook, on the multiple pages that we represent ourselves on for associations and other companies and organizations that are generous enough to share our broadcast on their pages, thank you so much. If you're watching us on same said YouTube channels, plus more diversity of people that actually offer us there, thank you for watching us there. If you're watching us on X, formerly Twitter, live, thank you. LinkedIn, it's only on my profile, so I hope all goes well, that you know me well enough to follow my LinkedIn for the live show. If you're on Twitch, you can watch us on your gaming console because we actually broadcast there. And for those that watch us on TV, yes, our TV channel, the Hospitality Channel, you can catch it on Roku TV, Google TV, Amazon TV, Apple TV, also smart TVs like LG and Samsung. Just look for the Hospitality Channel, the live show. This one is always on the free side of that. Welcome. Topic today is kind of a bringing together some things. We're in that wonderful time of year where a lot of associations, a lot of organizations, this is their last hard push. Focusrite's coming up. HSMEI, I think, just finished their Curie program. We're in the middle of the Curie program. A lot of organizations are doing their end of the year prognostications for 2024, year review. And of course, given the formats of the conferences and so forth, either a critical look at what were the influencing things of this year, or what will be the influencing things of next year. AI, of course, is a dominant conversation with that and the constant transitions of AI and its usages, just the most recent one being that the newest iteration with the latest data being now used, made available to public, plus also the retention of previous queries and questions and prompt requests is creating something very interesting. I was trying to describe to somebody the perspective I have of AI. It's like getting a wild animal as a pet. When they're little and cuddly and you're in control of the relationship, it's a wonderful thing. Then as they get larger and they can begin to hurt you, it turns into a mutual thing. And then eventually they realm into the world where they are able to uncontrollably affect your life in a bad way. And it turns dangerous to be around them. I kind of equate AI to that perspective. We are in the cuddly phase right now. And very quickly, we're going to get into the peered kind of, they can hurt us if we're not careful phase. And then afterwards goes into danger zone, I guess. And which always gives me a temperament as to the embracement of AI in many terms, which brings us to our topic. This is a long introduction to our topic today, but you'll see why when I say it, which is artificial hype versus actual reality. Now, what I wanted to craft is that I find it humorous, probably in an odd way, that the people that have the most vocal opinions of AI are the ones least using it themselves. It's not that they don't have team members or people in the organization that are feeding them what they're doing with it, but they themselves aren't the users. So it's very easy to have an opinion. I can have an opinion about what it's like to fly a F-18 Hornet fighter jet. Gosh knows I'm in the geek world of VRs and I can sit in the cockpit and visually swing around and I can identify instrumentation and so forth. That is a lot different than actually the physicality of flying the jet. I kind of see people with opinions about AI that they themselves don't use it themselves in that same category. They can see the things and they understand the concepts and they understand what they're looking at, but they aren't really in the trench working with it to understand the concerns and or issues with it. They tend to glaze over the parts that are unknown, as we as humans do, and say, I don't know exactly the answer to that question, whether this is yes or a no. So I'm assuming that it probably lends to this. And they make an opinion and then they keep that as a factual part of themselves. Like, well, I know when I do this, that I always thought it was this and it does this. That's not reality. The reality is that it doesn't work that way. The reality when you use AI is when you ask a query or prompt, it is looking for literally the next word after the word it just gave you. And it's based on a lot of things, but it's there to give you an answer. And as we've admonished many times before, and as you hear in the industry, for those that are aware of the things to be concerned about, authenticity, truth, and accuracy are not a part of the algorithm that's associated with the cognitive creation, the generative creation of a prompt's reply. It'll make stuff up. And we have plenty of examples that are being pointed in the news when people talk about AI, about legal briefs that were made up with fictitious legal settlements in a draft for lawyers that get themselves in trouble. And I think they end up getting disbarred because of it. But the reality is that we are learning how best to use AI, and those people that are using it are the best to talk about it. I don't even put myself into that category. I use it. I use it in certain ways, but the ways I use it most is I use the production function of another person to then use what they created to use AI. Every time I try to directly use AI and create spreadsheets that have prompt sequences, progressive prompt sequences, definitions of data that are used in the prompt sequences, I create simplistic things in my old man sense. Back when there used to be a school class on shop, I may have started wanting to make a birdhouse in shop, but ended up making an ashtray. Because even though I had great ideas of what I wanted the AI to do, the nuance of making the AI do what I would want particularly is elusive. It takes good skills. It takes working knowledge. Just generating prompts is great for single action answers. If this, then, boom, boom. I ask a question, it's clear enough for a singular answer. That's not the real value proposition of AI. AI is really about progressive use of generative AI, long language form, in the sense of the translation of how you say things to how the machine learning understands using it. And from that, you have this string. So you get to ask a much more advanced question because the string of prompts takes what you've said, uses it in conditional formatting progressively to get to the answer that's most relevant to what you asked. That string of prompt creation is the nuts and bolts, ditch digging, fingers on the keyboard people. They're not standing on stage talking about this. Very few of them are, I should say. They're the ones actually doing it. The people that are standing on stage and talking about AI aren't. They're the recipients of the efforts. And that comes again with a lot of assumptive perceptions as to AI. Why do I bring all this up in the context of artificial hype versus actual reality? Because we're beginning to use AI in a way that creates issues of, is it real or is it Memorex? Again, an older person's reference of the anyway. The idea was that the audio was so clear on the recording, it sounded like it was original or real. And we're finding that there is now beginning to have a growing perception from society of reviewing content with that as a filtered condition, meaning as they read something, in the back of the mind or in the forefront, they're looking at it, is this really somebody saying this, or is this a generated piece of content? Because we have seen a large influx of use of artificial intelligence content. And to our point, we've talked about it on the show. We've talked about it as tool uses. We've shared tools on our podcast about it, how to functionally use this, but always with the caveat that we are monitoring it and stylizing it to our own voice and to content that we know is truthful and accurate. Unfortunately, that guideline is not shared by everybody. All too often, I'm seeing a tremendous amount of BS content, not real, not relative, and certainly not fact checked. And I'm seeing a lot of it in social now. I'm seeing a lot of it in content posting for websites. To go back a little bit as to what I'm referencing to, when we would have, say, for instance, an event in our destination market for our hotel, all good marketing requires that there's content related to the advertisement. So we would want to create a page associated with that particular event, highlighting information that was useful to anybody thinking of going to that event and hence by staying at our hotel to do so. That takes time. It takes integration of several people. Your web developer may be external, not internal for you. So that means you have to give them enough lead time to give them content that they need to make a page. They need to create it into the navigation of the website so people can find it if that's what your strategy is for. Then they have to use a formatted page type to do this, which hopefully they've already pre-created the template for from when they made your website. They take the content you've given them, and then they have to go through a process of putting it onto the website. That's their function. In between those two is you have an SEO specialist, which is somebody that takes the content that you have written and optimizes to make sure you use the correct phrasing and referencing and potentially deep links and headline tags, H1s and H2s and so forth, anchor texts and so forth, so that the content has the highest value of discoverability for search engines and still conveys to the user the most optimal way of presenting the content, that balancing act between the two. But before them, you have the person that actually has to write the content. And that usually is internal, but perhaps it's your third party agency that you go to and say, this XYZ event, we want to create an ad campaign for. So we're asking you to do that. And we also need the page for the content that the ad campaign will be pointing to as well. So now you have somebody that has to write about the event. They have to do the research. Is there a link for parking? Is there a link for tickets? Is there a map that you can go to? Is there a list of shows? Is there an authority website that would be usefully and helpful to it? And then from that, you have to create the ads that use the same terms, the same information references, so that when the ad pops up, when people click on it, it's as relevant to the content they're going to as possible, right down to the same type of words you're using and references you're using. And of course, that also means if you're to go back up farther, for that to be an active campaign, you had to have created original organic content on social talking about the event to draw traffic so that when you present an offer about staying at the hotel for the event, people have already warmed up to the relationship between your hotel and that event. So it goes back quite a far ways. Here, there are now tools that help with that entire process. We've talked about them on the podcast, but let's talk about the simplest ones first. Content generation. You can go to tools that we've talked about on the podcast that will go out and you say, I want to write a blog or I want to write a Facebook post about the XYZ event. And it'll go out and search, find the websites for the XYZ event, find the content on those, find the optimized content on those, and write you a organic post on whatever social platform you designate that it's supposed to be writing for, with the parameters of how long and optimization of it, and it'll produce it lickety split. Good. That's nice. It's helpful. And then you go through and you confirm the fact checking that everything's correct. It didn't pull an errant side or make up something just to answer your question or whatever. It actually put it all together. And that's what the fact checking, the validation factor that goes through all that. Then you take that and you want to put it into your social content. Then you have to create the content for the website. So you then take the same platform and you say, hey, I want to make a blog content. Maybe that's preemptiveness or just a page itself. I want to make a web page describing greater detail about all the things about this XYZ event. And it'll go out and research for you and pull it all together. And you can optimize and look at it by saying, well, that's what I like to say. I don't want to say that. There's so many times I get to use that word, don't get to use it. All the little minutia associated with creating optimized content. And then you, if you're in control of your website, can take that content, put it onto a page. But wait, there's more. There's now new tools that if you plug them into your website, if they're WordPress based usually, and it'll actually go make the page for you and take the content that you generated, or it'll generate the content too, tries to cover both bases, and it'll create the page for you and put it into your website. And it'll even go so far as to make sure the proper links are in place within the navigation of your site in the menus. You can designate it, identify it, you can change it, of course. But these accelerations of what AI can do for you is really profoundly happy. So instead of that long string of discussion I just talked about on what you normally used to historically do for an XYZ event coming up for your hotel, gets abbreviated dramatically. And in most cases, something you can do internally. You rely less on that chain of resources that usually was the case for doing these types of programs. And you abbreviated down more of a concise, controllable one that you can do. Then on top of that, there's other AI tools, and all these tools, and I'm not trying to be vague about these. We've talked about them on our podcast. I just don't, on the live show, I don't try to talk so much about particular tools. Every once in a while they creep in, but I try not to, because we don't sponsor anything. We don't have any people that sponsor us. We do this pure for the content. So I don't want to taint it with, oh, well, I use this and this. That's what we do in the podcast. And we don't have sponsorships there either, or anybody pays us to do it. But the podcast is dedicated to actually tools and their usage of the tools based on the concepts that we talk about here on the live show each week. So guess what? This week we'll be talking about AI tools and usage for content development and ad creations and so forth. So that brings us to what I'm saying now is that now there's other tools that will take that same content that you give them, and they'll make all of your ad sets, all of them. It'll go and create your headlines, your dynamic headlines, your description lines. You give it the link to the page that you have the content for. It'll create them. It'll put them for your Bing formats, your Google formats, your Facebook formats. It'll actually even help you once you've created the ad types and sets and contents. There's another AI app that will go over and optimize the audience filtering that you would want to set up on certain platforms like Facebook, like Google. It actually will help you and not just tell you what to do. If you let it tap into those platforms, it'll do it for you. So now all of a sudden you have a person that could literally go from soup to nuts, old man's reference again, from beginning to end, with inception to implementation. All the content that's needed, all the distribution that's needed, all the campaigns that are needed, all of the tracking that's needed for optimization, because there's tools that will help you optimize. As you launch and release this, it'll monitor and measure the engagements, tell you what it needs to adjust for, and whether you have to adjust bids, and it'll actually do it for you as well. Adjust bids and or change ad copy based on what people are engaging with. There's tools that will watch what the page is used for, what did they click on, how do they engage with it, what's the duration of their time on the page relative to their actions of conversion. Plus you have GA4, which is going to tell you so much more about its overall interaction values. And all of that can be done now more internally. So what's the problem? Not really a problem unless you let it run automated. Not unless you allow it to just run as it does or not check what it creates. And that's where we begin into the foibles of content generation for AI. If for this to be as valuable as I've painted the picture for it, the critical element of that is having a knowledgeable person monitoring, policing, authenticating, and truth checking, fact checking what is being produced and how it's being used so that nothing artificial is about it. Unfortunately, the people that are in the roles that give them this knowledge are not the ones that are skilled in its execution. Remember my talk thing mentioned whining about the fact that people that talk about AI on stage aren't the ones that do it. The people behind the scenes that may be doing this are the ones that feed the information that they present on. Well, the same true about the execution of this. The people that are in the roles that would be best suited for this, people that are most knowledgeable about the product, your hotel, how it's presented to the public, your sales and marketing people, and who, in fact, should create all this functionality rather than having it outsourced or long stringed, as I described earlier, aren't the ones that will do it. They'll give it to a person that is not as fluent about what's being done, but is capable of the technology usage. Like they know how to make all these tools work, but they don't understand the context or the content specifically as to what's being generated, as to its accuracy. They don't know that half of your rooms don't face the sunset, but that's all you seem to talk about as if that's all the rooms you had. They don't know that you're not in walking distance of the event, but you're in proximity of the event, but you act and sound content development that it's close enough. These inaccuracies, okay, is what we're going to get a little bit more conversation on in just a minute. But because of the difference between the people that are most knowledgeable to do it in the sense of content and creation versus those that facilitate what can be done, you get this disparity of artificial content that people will begin to look at when they're reviewing something as to whether or not it's AI generated or whether it's really a person sharing the content. And that's becoming a problem because as more and more people go over and say, oh, I don't have to hire a person, I don't have to pay a third party as much. I can just have somebody that's doing this. I add that to their workload because it's an automated process. It's not that much extra effort, whatever. Maybe you can overcompensate them for it. Who's to say? But that cheapening by reducing down costs, and we've been an advocate of doing that, reducing down, because of the lack of bandwidth and so many things, reducing down all the people that have to be a part of it is all good as long as the integrity of the quality is maintained. Going back in history, it was looked at that handmade items before factories and manufacturing was the thing were inaccurate. There was inconsistencies about handmade stuff because each item made was slightly different than the item before because it was made by hand one by one. When manufacturing came in, it was touted as a great solution because everything was the same. Everything was the Model A was the Model A from for the first one to the thousandth one. It was the same parts manufactured in the same pattern, put the same together the same way. Even though handmade may have tried to attempt that, the repetitiveness, there's always a nuance that was a little bit different. And we reveled in that. That manufacture was the way to go, and almost handmade stuff almost was gone. And then all of a sudden, the resurgence back, going, manufacturing. If there's a flaw, it's a flaw in everything. Handmade meant that it was built and was built with care and a focus and all the other things that mass marketers have created for it. So now handmade has a higher value than manufactured on so many things. That same aspect of our marketing and advertising is at play. People will see AI content, and it may be good AI content, and it may be accurate AI content, but the nature of the voice presenting it is not as human in its nuance as the human that used to write that content that has been replaced. That's the hardest part, is changing from how you've been doing it to doing it in a more automated AI way, to not lose that human feel component to it that is now being done in an automated way. It's going to change regardless, but if it changes to being too artificial, that's the line that I'm drawing attention to. It's not so much that you change from a human doing it, and yes, there will be changes to it. If I wrote something behind a friend of mine and I try to write like them, I'll use the same words some way, but there'll be some ways I don't that make it sound like somebody else wrote it. It's like when you watch or see cartoons in the newspaper. Yeah, nobody does that anymore. When a cartoon is made and wherever you see it, you can always tell when an artist is filling in for the previous artist. They replicate it as best they can, but it's not the same. When somebody takes over as a guest host or as a guest writer for a person's article, you can tell the different writing tone, the nuance of it, the words, the way the words are put together, how long of a sentence they make, where they put their commas. That change between the human and the artificial is noticeable. It's just whether it's realistic that, okay, well, it's not the same person, could be automated, but the content's good, it's well written and so forth. So I'm okay with this. That's what you want. Um, the the scary part of all this is that as we begin to use more and more of these platforms, we're recreating an issue we used to have before, and that was the flood of reviews and responses to reviews and the generation of those. It used to be news a few years ago, the expose of hiring people to give you artificially good reviews. That you can go to a platform, Fiverr, and pay X dollars to have somebody write you 1,000 good reviews from what looked like a variety of people when they're all bots. Generated accounts that had no depth, nobody behind them. They were just used so they'd have all individual IDs, and they were used to generate a lot of artificial reviews. And that was vetted for a long time. It's still a persistent issue of artificial reviews, artificial responses, and so forth. Actually, artificial responses is relatively new because we didn't have that luxury of being able to auto reply to things. We now do. There's apps, AI apps, that will give you a wonderful context, that so you don't sound repetitive. It went to fix a problem, but created one in by doing it. That fixed the problem of when I was writing reviews back all the time for people. You want to acknowledge when people say good things to you in their reviews of you. Unfortunately, I found that I was, to be time saving, would find myself cutting and pasting a lot of the same stuff. Thank you, Loren, for your positive and kind words. We appreciate your time with us and appreciate your business, or whatever I used to say. And you're sitting there going, oh my gosh. So when somebody looks at my reviews and they see that I do reply to the good people and the negative ones, it sounds like I'm just cutting and pasting, which is what I was doing. So now there's apps that help you read the content that was given to you, picture highlights out of it that you want to refer to, and it'll generate a response that seems more genuinely directed to that specific positive review. It's helpful, but if you do it without checking it, it can also sound very fake. It does the same as if I was cutting and pasting. It's like, you really didn't take time to answer them. You took the time to make a response so that somebody like me would see it, but it's just a cut and paste. Same negative impact. Well, it's just the AI taking words out of what that person said and returning it and regurgitating it back in what looks like a custom reply. You don't want the same impact for that. So we've created a new problem with the solution of an old problem. Usually the case. Was it Tim Peter says that, and he doesn't take credit for this, but we give him credit for it. When the ship was created, so too was the shipwreck. Um, that's what happened with something like that. Now, artificial content creation has its own life of issues. As I mentioned before, by creating it, you have to make sure that sounds as genuine and as what you would say had you written it directly yourself without any support. But also, more importantly, it has to be truthful. Like we said, with AI, the part that gets glazed over by those that present about their opinions of AI is that AI is a function of literally generative AI. Word written is the next thing is the next word written. It doesn't conceptualize the entire AI concept and then itemize out how it represents it. It literally writes towards it as it uses the words it's writing. Generative, not cognitive. Graphics. Anyways, the idea is don't get caught up in this flood of, it's disheartening. I was going to say nauseating. It's disheartening to see large organizations start gurgling out data that they're not an authority on, but try to act like they are because they're buzzworthy topics of AI generated content related to that topic. They literally went into an AI platform, said to write an article about XYZ or ABC, since we use XYZ for the hotel event, ABC, and it generated an article and then they pumped it on out. And look at this, our experts are talking about this. No, it's an AI, the gen piece of content that you wanted to get credit that you were talking. It's just a traffic hook, bait hook. That's all it is. It's like a buzzword. It's a bait post. Those are the kind of things that I see so much of very large organizations that are genning this kind of content on. I'm very surprised that this is a cheapening of what they should be by thinking that they just flood the market with an opinion and expert advice because they're riding on the laurels of their organization. It really diminishes their value because it shows how immature their marketing strategy is. So the idea of using artificial intelligence content is good under certain guidelines and conditions. Kind of like I was telling you about taking an exotic pet as exotic animal as a pet. Soft and cuddly, in control of the situation, it's wonderful. As they get bigger and they turn into a threat that they can potentially harm you, but it's more of a peer-to-peer relationship, it's uncomfortable. Then it gets to the point where they are superior in the sense they can hurt you at will and you can't do anything about it. Then it turns dangerous. We're in the early cuddly phases of this stuff. And for that reason, we need to make sure that we put fences around the next transition, which is it can be damaging to us if we allow it to get beyond our control. And that's where a lot of these organizations, in their whole heart and abandonment of people monitoring these things and their embracing of these automations associated with AI and its content generation, in particular for our discussion today, is going to run into problems. Because as I'm seeing, we're already seeing large organizations doing this, producing content, just fountains and mountains and rivers and flows and oceans of content that sound and look and have some value in the sense of that aggregated data, but absolutely no heart, purpose, personality, voice, or perspective of the company. Just mountains of, we are so knowledgeable about so many things, even though it's not us spouting this out. It's just a funnel. I'm taking something else and I'm shoving it over here and saying it's mine. That's what I see a lot of companies and things doing. I see a lot of marketing like that. Strangely, I'm making a prognostication since most of these conferences I was mentioning about this time of year are doing the very same thing. I think this will be our last holiday season that we do not see a flood of variable holiday ads related to content landing locations. What I mean by that is we have our traditional pre-Black Friday offers. I just saw on the morning show that 63% of all holiday purchases this year, which will be, I think, around $837 ahead of their forecast this year, will be done online. And so because of that, you're going to get a tremendous amount of online authoritative content because people marketing wise know we used to just try to be in front of the people when they're at that ZMOT, that moment of transaction. And we realized it's better to try to engage with them earlier up that funnel, maybe in their education phase, or even if we want to have enough money of opportunity in the discovery phase. Well, the cheap way to be in the discovery phase is not through advertisement, which has been prohibitive for most people, but in content generation. The more you can be out front for people to discover just content that you've provided, the more aware of you they are, because you're the one that provided that content. Think of the Google answer boxes and so forth. If you can be in that space about a variety of stuff, which is why you see the flood of content. You're seeing people put the content there because that gets them in that part where they're not selling you something. That's their intent and final intent, but right at the moment they're trying to put content in your way to make you aware of them, and do the same thing. The issue is the oversaturation of the content reduces its authority and its viability of value. If I see, it's kind of like retargeting ads. I touch your website, now I'm seeing your website on literally freaking everything I go to for the next 2 weeks. Drives me nothing. It's the negative aspect of retargeting, where frequency should be dialed down. Instead, they amp it up. Well, my prognostication is this year is the last year that we see a more traditional format of engagement. And next year, you're going to see the 10 things you should do for Christmas. We're already seeing it this year, but we're going to see way more of it next year. The 5 things you should consider for such and such. And you're going to start seeing more and more dynamic content on the fly. And what do I mean by that? Right now, from what I'm complaining about per se, is that you have to objectively go in and decide you're going to create content about something. I want to create a content, going back to our hotel example, about event XYZ. What we're going to get into next year will be, we don't even get to make that decision. We are going to get shown what we should be talking about. We'll be given how we're going to talk about it. Will be created how people are going to act on it. And we're going to have the ability to measure the success of that. And it's all going to be handed to us with a nice little bow on it that says, welcome to AI marketing. We're going to know when we need to talk about the XYZ event, because we're going to take the data of the engagement from last year and realize that we have to start this there. We're going to know the channels that people engaged with that data early on versus the ones later. And we're going to make sure that we're there at the earliest inception of those channels of value. We're going to have the content generated on the content that was most often used. We're going to have the ads about the things that people bought the most for. And we're going to have that all targeted to the people we know that were most interested in it because of the data we got from the last time that they engaged with us. And a person next year, we will be at this level that will simply look at the process, see the projected value of the program, and decide whether that is what they agree to do. You see Google trying to do that now with their PMax program, where they just tell us what you want, ROI or traffic or engagement, whatever, and we'll tell you how much money you should need to spend with us. Give us that money, and we'll go take care of the rest. We'll make all the ads for you. We'll do all the stuff about it. But the part that they're not doing for you right now is they're not creating content related to their advertising they're creating for you. You're going to see that gap close next year. Now, in fact, it should be closing earlier next year. You're going to see now where services that handle the automation of your advertising, like Google's trying to do with their PMax, which is fraught with problems. And you're going to see a connection from another side where people are going to generate the content that is usable, that the advertisement that PMax creates connects to, like a PMax. You're also going to see, I believe, automations similar to PMax, not in the Google platform, because as much as Google is the 800-pound gorilla, they want you to be focused on their advertisement. They want your money. Bing has a growing interest in the search market this past year because of its ChatGPT integration. You have Facebook rebounding in its usability with its audiences because of the diminishment of cookie values and how it's now being transitioned into as time goes forward, and its exclusion of durabilities like iOS's 17's removal of durations and so forth now to 7 days, and sometimes it's outright blocking of analytics tracking. You're getting these conversations that never existed, data lakes, data lodge houses, lakeside lodge houses, which people are like, what the hell is that? It's about confining your own data for your own usability. It's isolating your data to be used for you by you, and not connected out to other resources and other function, keeping it to yourself, so to speak. First person data that you're getting, you're creating a data lake for, just to help you with that. So the idea is next year, you're going to see a lot of increased AI automations and artificial usages of content connected to advertising connected to monitoring. Those three pieces are going to get closer together. I still think there's going to be a gap point between them, even at the end of the next year, but you see a very high usage of them. You might begin to find that as people's individual function values of how they do business, how they get hotel rooms, when they get hotel rooms, we tend to homogenize people. We tend to try to have to cluster them together for our human minds to conceive of them in context. Think of Smurf markets. It's not little blue people, social, military, educational, fraternal. Okay. The idea is religious, sorry, um, is that AI has the ability to look at the individuality of people. So, me as a user, maybe I'm one of those people that do most of my heavy shopping for Christmas during um, Prime Day in August or Walmart promotion day or whatever. And so, most of my content to me, dynamically created for my engagements, literally built in front of me as I engage, okay, will be about answering to the point that if I get the right information in front of me, I can make some of those Christmas decisions as early as August because that's what I did historically before. Now, maybe an exception to one year, and that's what it's based on, and I don't react to it, which is what it'll learn from for the next year. But the idea that dynamic content and ads will now, rather than being pre-structured, be built with a purpose in mind and allow it to be built in front of the engagement that it creates. It's my prognostication for 2024. I believe that we're at that point now that content generation, tailored custom content generation, will be generated in front of me as I click on things on your site. And the corresponding ad creations that I'll see from that will be created from the content that was generated for me. Mark me down on the November 10th live show 431. That's my forecast for 2024. So I think I've hit most of it when it comes to hype versus reality for content generation, especially for reviews and content generation for social, content generation for websites, content generation for ads. But what I also want to touch on for AI is fake correlations of data. It's looking for, based on outlines that you've identified in your prompts, is an answer to your question. And what that means is, even if it's not a correlation that is valuable or data that is usable for what it's being asked, it might refer to it enough to think that that's the answer because it doesn't know about the accuracy of it. It just knows the value of it. And so when I think of this, I think of back in the day when I was really messing with some raw data, and when Watson came out, when IBM Watson was a thing, and we had a chance to play with it. And so we had a guy that was a graduate that had data science. He graduated as a data scientist, and really neat kid, really, um, and no experience with hospitality. And so I fed him a bunch of data that we had from a client related to their operations. And he came back in after, I don't know, half hour. So he says, Lauren, I got my first really big correlation. And that was the longer people stay, the more money we make. You're right. Thank you, Captain Obvious. That makes sense. Data on its own is valuable as long as you understand what the data is showing you. By the same token, ask the wrong question, get the wrong answer. If you try to construct data or ask a question about the data that doesn't have a relevant factor that is usable, it'll find the relevancy of the data that it can use to give you an answer. And if you base decisions without understanding the source of that data's usage, you're destined to create either, at worst, bad decisions, two, costly decisions, and three, if it's personal interactions and content engagements with people, disastrous relationship decisions. So the idea that data can be used, but bad data can also be used, should be a caveat warning about how you structure data's interpretation. What you think is asking the right question may give you an answer that's not based on the right data. You have to define the data that you want to use for your question, keeping in mind that you too can be wrong. If you approach questions just the idea that I know the data is there, and if I took enough time, I could use the data that I want. But I want to get a faster answer. That's a nice start. Then there's data sources you're looking at. So there's just too much data and no way to look at it, kind of like a paralysis of choice. So I need to first identify the data in a way that then I can identify how I want to use it. That's another great usage of AI. But if you just go in and go, here's a plump load of data, structured, unstructured data, let's just put it in a big old pile. And then you ask AI, tell me who's the best person to sell to for March. It's going to look for whatever data until it can get you an answer. It might not look at all the data, it'll look at enough data to give you an answer. And it might pull data from places that you don't know why it pulled it from, but used it as an answer for you. And it might give you a completely wrong answer based on what potentially could have been good data. So the inverse happens. You have to ask good questions, but you also have to have good data. You also have to have good data to ask good questions. I know it sounds like a circular kumatata, the circle of life. So I think in all the ways that I wanted to talk about this, AI, the end of 2023, as we go into this now, mid-November, the conclusions of the conference series programs as we get now focused in on corporate office parties and family get-togethers and holiday seasons, because we're going to be chucked clean into the 2024 here in just a matter of weeks, is to be mindful of the fact that we are, of course, with the changes that have happened in 2023, the bountiful changes that are going to happen in 2024, the influences on all of those things, and the Wild West analogy of how AI is both perceived and used and talked about, is all things you have to take with the proverbial grain of salt. Understand that the more you can identify what you're asking, the more you can identify the data that you're using, the more qualified, truthful, and accurate the answer you're going to be getting. The content that you create, the way that you use that content, monitored, policed, and authenticated, is the key elements of keeping those things together, so that AI is still going to stay a little bit longer the soft and cuddly wild animal that we've decided to take on as a pet. Because regardless our best efforts, it will soon turn into a relationship in which they can strike out and hurt us inadvertently or inadvertently, because it's in their nature to do what we've asked them to be doing, created as they're created, so to speak. And then it will eventually get to the point where it'll be a dangerous relationship, because we won't be in full control of how and what it gets done and used for, by literally how we're handling it now. People on stage talking about stuff they don't do, supported by people that are more interested in the preservation of their job or their income, to allow that to happen in ways that is inaccurate. I give you that caveat. So I love your feedback. By all means, please get back with me for any response to this show, our podcast. You can watch any of our podcast and live shows in perpetual I Love Lucy reruns on our hospitalitychannel.tv website. If you want to watch us on TV or get to all the additional content behind the pay gateway, we're like Netflix or Hulu in that sense. A lot of hospitality industry content. This isn't a consumer-based television channel. It's an industry-based television channel. We have lots of fun content about products and methodologies and so forth. That's the Hospitality Channel. You can get it on your Roku TV, Amazon TV, Apple TV, Google TV, any smart TV. Just look for the Hospitality Channel. Live show is always free. But also our iOS and Android or Google Play app. Just look for the Hospitality Channel. Our app is there. TV channel is connected to that. We also have our podcast, our audio podcast. We do. Right after this show, we'll talk about tools and the usability of those tools. I also do a quick recap of our show here. We tend to run the podcast audibly about 20, maybe 30 minutes most. Podcast has been in existence for 17 years. It's been weekly now we're in our 10th year. And our live show, this TV show, we do weekly no matter where we are in the world. We're in our 10th year as well. We're broadcast to 209 countries. Our podcast is in 39 countries. We translate them to 11 different languages. We do recast this live show 11:30 a.m. Sydney, Australian time for our APAC friends, and 11:30 a.m. Wednesday morning, London, UK time for our European and Mideast friends. We also have our radio station. Sorry, I forgot about all that. Our radio station, hospitalityradio.com, is the website, but just look for Hospitality Radio. We're on 26 different internationally broadcasted radio stations. with our show. We have a variety. We recast our marketing podcast. We have a revenue management podcast. We have a sales podcast. We have a meta search podcast. We have operations podcast. Um, Lots of different podcasts from a variety of people. That's what the radio station does, is broadcast content. It's a lot of fun. You can catch that, and plus also, like I said, our podcast. It's on 39 platforms. You can catch it from iTunes, Apple, Google Play, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, whatever. We're all there as well. So we try to be everywhere, and also on Twitch if you use your gaming console. So, we try to be everywhere that we can for all of this content. We appreciate very much any feedback that you give us. We answer each and every email at Loren@hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com for both the live show and the podcast. And of course, we have our audio feedback and audio question we do every week at hdm.news/talkback. You can answer the question we have, or you can give us your feedback audibly. If you just want to record yourself talking to us, we answer those back as well, and gives us content suggestions for our show always. So my name is Loren Gray. I thank you for the privilege of your time, and I look forward to talking to you all next week.